By now, you might be hoping that if you follow the steps we've already talked about, that you'll have a foolproof plan for sticky faith. Sorry, we can't make any such guarantees. The uncomfortable truth is that the sticky faith journey is full of highs and lows. While we hope and pray that our kids remain glued to Jesus, many of them will drift, at least for a season. You've probably noticed the bridge behind me. I love the bridge as a metaphor for what happens to our kids as they graduate from high school and head to the military or a career or to college. For one thing, we as parents, we don't know exactly where our kids are going to end up. And our kids take a pace that can be unpredictable. Sometimes they seem to go 3 steps forward and then 2.93 steps back. Or they stop and start and seem to stall altogether. If you're one of those families whose kids seem to cross the bridge relatively smoothly, then be humbly grateful. If you're one of those whose kids seem to drift a little bit, take hope knowing that there are healthy elements to drifting. While your kids' journey might look different than your own, in the end, they can still develop sticky faith. In this 5th and final lesson, we'll look at how we can respond when our kids start to drift. What can you and I do? What practical responses can you and I take? Ultimately, be encouraged, knowing that God is still active, and God ultimately and always sticks with us and with our families.
Ultimately, your main goal with your child's faith is that their spiritual journey leads to your child truly adopting their faith as their own. At some point, every parent wakes up to the realization that what matters to and for our kids are not our hopes, plans, and dreams for them. What matters is their hopes, plans, and dreams. This applies to sports, music, drama, and dance. It applies to academic interests, and perhaps even more so, it applies to their faith. We tend to want to control our kids' faith development. If you're like me, you want that so badly, but it needs to be our kids' own faith. We end this video series with our best ideas along the sticky faith journey to help your kids, regardless of their life stage and spiritual path, experience the fullness of life with Christ every step along the way. First, we can shower our kids with unconditional support as their path is a bit more meandering than we would wish. Today's kids are surrounded by performance-driven agendas and feelings of abandonment. At some level, for all kids, note I said all kids, growing up is difficult and lonely. Into this reality, we as parents add our own desires and expectations that our children grow up as faithful followers of Jesus. We don't mean for faith to be another high bar our kids have to reach. But because for most of us, faith is such a highly sacred value, it's difficult to stand back and allow our kids to make their own choices. By the very nature of faith commitment, we as parents strongly desire for our kids to follow in our faith footsteps. Our kids know this. It is never far off their developmental desktop. The dilemma our kids face as they move into high school and beyond is they know how much we want them to take their faith seriously. But they also soon come to know that faith is ultimately meaningless unless they choose it for themselves. Our goal as parents needs to be to stick with them through that process. Parenthood comes with an unquenchable longing to defend, shelter, and protect. A typical parent joke is that when the first child drops her pacifier, you pick it up, run to the sink, and then wash it with clean water. When the second child drops his pacifier, you pick it up, rub it on your pants, and then pop it back in your kid's mouth. When the third child drops their pacifier, you go ask the dog to fetch it. But joking aside, with each child we notice, we pray, we worry, and we weep. While your kids are going through adolescence, especially during those times or struggle or experimentation with lifestyle choices, your long-term stable commitment to be there for them, regardless of how they act, is one of your greatest gifts to them. The word respect has morphed into something that is earned through position or performance. But when Peter says in 1 Peter 3 to deal with others with gentleness and respect, he is affirming a central tenet of God's intention for how people treat each other. You can disagree with your child even vehemently. You can disagree with their choices or lifestyle, and you can still respect them. You can be their friend even when they have thoroughly disappointed you. That's the call of the gospel. That's also the lifelong call of being a parent. When our kids shelve their faith for a time, it's so tempting to think that if we just manipulate a few details of their situation, they'll return to their roots. This often manifests when we think, well, if my daughter would just come to church with me at Christmas, she'll realize how much she needs Jesus. Or maybe if I can just have my son and that nice young woman at church over for dinner together, my son will want to go back to church again. Of course, God can use a dinner or church service to draw our kids back to Him. But as we've learned by talking with families nationwide, that's not normally how it happens. Restoration normally occurs through relationship. Far more important than twisting your child's arm to get them to darken the door at church is for them to know that you are there for them no matter what. I know of some parents who had a daughter who went through a difficult patch as she crossed the bridge from high school to college. As their daughter was drifting, these parents worked hard to find the balance between tough love and encouragement. During their daughter's senior year, she not only pulled away from her faith, but she also pulled away from school and friends and family. All this caused her parents enormous pain. During this agonizing season, the dad kept a framed letter in the center of his desk, facing him all day. The letter showed what his 17-year-old daughter meant to him. The letter is entitled Daughter 17 and reads like this: I have a daughter 17. When she lies to me, I love her. When she disappoints me, I love her. When she doesn't live up to my expectations, I love her. When she reflects poorly on my name, I love her. You say, now I can understand how you love her when she pleases you and obeys you and fulfills you. But that's not what I'm talking about. It's when she does none of these things. I love her. And for a very simple reason. I'm her father, and she's my child. When your kids disappoint you, note I said when, not if. You may be tempted to distance yourself from them. You might want to teach them a lesson, or maybe even protect yourself. But remember this, everywhere they turn, your kids have grown up in a culture in which when they struggle or fail, people tend to walk away. Especially during their lowest times, your kids need to know that above all else, you are there for them, regardless of what they are going through. In the case of the dad who had the letter about his daughter, she took several years of hard knocks and destructive choices before she finally settled into herself as a person. Although the story doesn't go this way for everyone, she eventually returned to her Christian roots and is deeply involved with her faith. There's no way to know for sure how her folks' consistent love and support contributed to her coming back to the God who loves her. But our research shows that when kids don't feel abandoned, but instead supported by parents and other adults who walk with them and show them unconditional love, they are more likely to develop sticky faith.
Probably one of the first things that I remember, at least in interacting with the church, is we had grown up in the church. My dad was an associate pastor. My mom was, choir director, Sunday school. We were there every day of the week, 2 or 3 times on Sunday. And so everything that we knew, at least about life, was in the church. But there was an evening, I've got an older brother, 18 months older, and a younger sister, 13 months. And there was an evening when we were at our pastor's house watching, the Ewoks and, them taking on the Imperial Stormtroopers. And we're watching this, and my mom calls us up into the pastor's actually bedroom, and walk up there, and there's the pastor and his wife and another elder and stuff, and my mom on the bed, and you can tell she had been crying, and I was more concerned with that I was being pulled away from the Ewoks than what was going on. But so she sits us down, and she did it one by one, and I remember sitting there and had my popcorn, and she just tried to explain, something's happened, and your dad is going to go away for a long time. And what I remember comprehending at 6 was, Dad had committed a crime, and was going to go to jail for years and years, and wasn't going to see him for a while. And then my brother and sister came up, and it was all 4 of us, and mom's crying on the bed, and pastor's there trying to help us out. And just thinking, okay, well, so it's us 4, and I don't know what that means. I don't know what that is going to look like, but I just know Dad's not coming back. It was the months after that began to really kind of give shape to at least my thought on the church, and it wasn't good. It was a small town, and so everywhere we went, you would go into the diner, and they would open the newspaper, and there's your dad, getting sentenced. Or you would go to school, which was affiliated with the church, and it was the same kind of thing. And so the association that began to take place was simply church was, where you were mocked, where you felt judgment, where it was no longer safe. Throughout probably the majority of my my faith up until mid-20s, there was a duplicitous lifestyle, and as I look back, I honestly think that it was because there weren't any roots. There was no true foundation. There wasn't anything for when the storms came. Much like the parable, there wasn't a foundation that was actually built on something that was sturdy. And so, in high school, even after the faith became my own, what it became was convenience. That you would access faith when there was a crisis, or when it was there was blessings. It was, I'll acknowledge you, thank you, and when there's not, I'll curse you, and where are you? And when I arrived, at college, I got a chance to create, yourself and a new self, and just like anyone does. But what I was faced with was a desire to have faith and to be, a man of God. But I had no foundation. I had no pillars around. I had no mentors. There was no discipleship. There was nothing familiar, for me. The only thing that was comforting and familiar were old habits. So when you would come home, or when I, would come home, you could fall into, oh yeah, Joel has faith. They know Joel, and Joel's this type of person. And then when you left, shadow self appears, and you got to be, and I got to be whoever I wanted. So what that did for me was there was always a desire, and there was always a strong calling that I felt that this wasn't, the life that I was supposed to live, or supposed to be the person I was supposed to be. To give you an example, I, was still getting drunk, on the weekends, and drinking heavily, and working at a church, for 2 years. Was still at, a school coaching, at a Christian school coaching, and yet was just going to go drink after, the game. And what that did is, for me, is that it only furthered the shame and the guilt that I wasn't living up to, what I desired and what I knew I was supposed to be, and called to be. So, as if a hangover, isn't enough, then you put your spiritual hangover on it, and you don't want anything to do with the church. Because it was only a reminder of your shortcomings. It was only a reminder, and only further for me, that the additional baggage that I had, that I wasn't enough, and that you weren't worthy of being pursued by anyone. And there were no, our high school, mentor leader wasn't there anymore, and there was just no foundation. Nothing stuck. I'd look in the mirror, and most of the times I just didn't like what I saw. because there was always this desire that you wanted to be, healthy, and yet if you were looking for life and you were looking for health, that you were looking for it in the sickest of places, and that there could be no fulfillment at the bottom of a bottle, and that anything that I was looking for could only be found, and obviously, at least now it's apparent, in Christ and in the faith of substance. So I've got an older brother, and a younger sister, and both of them are very, dynamic personalities, extroverted, and I like, being alone. Still like to go to movies by myself, and that's my thing. And so what always made it an interesting tension for the development of my faith was my mother's role in it, because it was one of those things where it was just, Joel's going to take care of it himself. Joel's going to, gather and do his due diligence and whatever it is, versus my brother and sister, it was very kind of, hands-on. Let's make sure, Bubba does this, or let's make sure your sister does this. It was very kind of a hands-off approach for Joel. And while she never intended it to be, received as, you're less than or anything like that, the way I always received it was simply, you're kind of just on your own. And so, you couple that, with your gradual, progression into high school, and, you see your brother and your sister, and they always had, restrictions, and it was this, that, and the other, and I never did. And partly just because I never had desires to go crazy and to do stuff, but it was never had a curfew, was never grounded, was never stuff like that. And so, but I received that as, I don't know how to say it's hard to even still kind of formulate how, why I didn't get that same kind of attention. And then even going through high school and then into college with, drinking and living such a duplicitous lifestyle, why there wasn't, a mirror, why someone didn't keep me accountable to it. Because while it was meant as, just an unconditional love, I'm going to accept him, any which way, with his struggles, without it, the way that I always received it was simply, that it just wasn't worth, the fight, that it wasn't worth fighting for, at least in that state. And while my mom never intended it that way, it was just simply the way that I received it. I just needed to know that someone was there struggling with me, and that someone was there, in your corner, and, was going to either cheer you on or say, it's an unconditional love, but yet unconditional doesn't mean, without consequence or without parameters. So especially when in high school and in college, when I really began to struggle with my faith, what I'd, probably wished, occurred more was just simply questions. And I know parents are always so cautious of that, and I'm invading this and that, but it would have made, even for the, quiet introvert kid, probably a world of difference. When I'd taken off to college, it was, all right, let him grow, let him, establish roots, but there was just very minimal contact, minimal, phone calls or even appearances. And while it was meant to be, I just want him to have his space, the way that it, the seed kind of gets in there is just, you're on your own. So even if it was just the letters, or, the casual, hey, how are you? Or, please, why don't you come on home? And if that was said, maybe I just didn't hear it, I don't know. But it was just the little things of, whether it was letters or emails or showing up randomly. But I think just the conversations would have been enough, because I think I know it's within at least my nature to identify if someone's really trying to throw a rope, and I need it.
Second, in the midst of the process of walking with your child, remember that your faith impacts your child more than any other factor. All things being equal, how you express and live out your faith will have a greater impact on your child's life than anything else. What they see and hear and experience growing up with you will communicate more about the essence of faith than anything they face or anyone they know. Youth pastors, mentors, young life leaders, friends of faith, and other people God brings into their life might be who they talk about when they are asked to share about their relationship with God. But the legacy that you and I leave will forever imprint upon our kids the importance and centrality of faith. At one point, some friends of mine had a son who was going through some really dark years. The most powerful counsel they received was from a couple who had gone through parenting and had come out on the other end. Their advice is my third and final suggestion along this sticky journey. This couple shared that their daughter's choices during college had sent them into deep questioning and anxiety. In the midst of this traumatic time, they described picturing Jesus standing at the top of a mountain in all his majesty and splendor. His arms were outstretched and his eyes were filled with compassion. He was saying without words, "Let me take your child, for she is mine too. I love her and I will be with her. Trust me with your child." This father telling the story paused, recounting the beauty and wonder of this memory. He then said, "I handed our daughter to Jesus. He held her and I wept. We were so grateful and relieved. We knew the Lord was present and real and cared. We knew he was faithful to help her and lift her up. Then," he paused at this point, and then the father continued the story. "I just couldn't leave my daughter with Jesus. I couldn't trust Jesus with her, even though part of me wanted to. I reached out and took her from Jesus and thanked him. I walked back down the mountain carrying our daughter because she was our child and we were her parents." The father continued, "That was our journey, or actually my journey. My wife was able to leave her there just as she was, lying in the arms of the Savior who loved her. But I couldn't let go. I couldn't trust him with her until much, much later." Having learned the hard way, this father's final words of advice were these: "Take your child to Jesus and leave her there." If you're like me, you can picture the scene and you want so desperately to leave your own children with Jesus. But like the dad sharing his heart-wrenching story, I am so tempted to pick up my children to try to control their situations myself. Maybe you are too. So we end this video with a simple request. Leave your child with Jesus. He is the Emmanuel. He will always, always, always stick with your kids and with you too. And that is our hope. More important than any single step we can take to help our kids build sticky faith is that we deeply know that Jesus sticks with all of us, always.